Hello once again, I'm Cosmic, and today we're going to be taking a look at the PC version of Sentinels of the Multiverse, developed by Handelbra Games. The game was first a mobile game on iOS and Android devices, and this is the direct PC port from the mobile version. Sentinels of the Multiverse is the video game adaptation of the card game made by Greater Than Games that released in 2011. Essentially, Sentinels of the Multiverse is a superhero themed card game that is presented in a comic book style. You may have missed its release on Steam as it was released during the 2014 Steam Winter Sale, so let's get on and take a look at the gameplay. Each match consists of three main elements: the heroes, the villain, and the environment. Each has their own deck of cards, which in the heroes' case consists of abilities and things of that nature, and in the villains and environments' case can consist of both abilities and minion cards. The aim of the game is obviously to defeat the villain. After all, that is what superheroes do. With this being a port from mobile devices and thus touchscreens, the controls are completely run by the mouse alone. No real change in the UI has occurred from the mobile version, and while controls aren't terrible, as it's a card game and it's a simple case of clicking things, they can seem somewhat unresponsive at times. I would have liked to seen more adaptation for the PC, as often straight over ports from mobile games can feel disjointed in their touchscreen specific UIs. At the end of the day, when you're playing on a PC, you want the ability to use the keyboard and hotkey commands to your keyboard, which is something that seems that these mobile ports just completely forget about. The basic mechanics of the game are pretty simple. Each of your heroes on their first turn will start the game with 4 cards in their hand. Cards consist of one-shot cards, which are cards that usually inflict damage, equipment cards, and ongoing effect cards. At the start of the battle, the villain will take their turn first, then your heroes will have a turn, and then the environment. This turn order will stay the same throughout the battle. Each character's turn works from a 3-tiered structure, which is play, power, and draw, which essentially denotes the order in which you can take actions. First, you can play a card from your hand, and then you can use that card, and if you wish to play a power, either from your card or a hero's default power, you can do that then. And then finally, once all other actions have taken place, you can draw a card and then end your turn. One good thing about the 10 heroes available is that they vary in their own mechanics greatly. Legacy, for example, has damage dealing one-shots, but much of his abilities buff the other heroes in some form. This ends up meaning that you have to adapt and figure out new strategies depending on who you have chosen in your squad and finding the best way to complement each character. Similar to the superheroes in the game, each villain in the game has a different mechanic, different decks, and thus different strategies. They can all deal different types of damage and have different difficulty levels. An interesting example of this is when the villain Grand Warlord Voss, who employs an abundance of minion cards, he also has a special card that once destroyed, forces a selection of defeated monsters from the discard pile back into play, instantly bulking up his defense and offense again. Each villain and hero has a respective nemesis, such as Baron Blade and Legacy. This means that each will do additional damage to each other should they target one another. Once you have dropped your villain's HP to 0, the fight isn't over. Like in movies and comic books of old, the villain always has a backup plan to be foiled, and the villain will change tactics and be reborn in the sense for you to fight a final time. The environment adds an additional tactical element to the battle. There are up to 4 environments to play in currently, and each acts almost like a neutral player with their own deck. The environment can play minion cards that will attack both the heroes and the villain, as well as cards that have other effects, such as a volcano card that will deal damage to everyone each turn unless it's destroyed. One great addition that the developers threw in was the status tracker, so that you can view what status effects and damage modifiers are currently in play, and not have to keep track of everything yourself like in the tabletop game. The cards in the game can really change the flow, even the rules of the game, with effects and powers. It means that you must always be ready to adapt your strategy, as for example, your main damage dealer may get totally nullified as the villain may play something that completely negates their damage type. Graphically, the game is simple but vibrant. Battles are presented in a comic book style, so as the characters go from turn to turn, the pages of the comic flick through every time a turn is taken. The interface was very clearly designed for touchscreens, which works fine with a mouse, but I would have liked to seen a little effort made for the inclusion of the keyboard and perhaps some minor UI changes so that clickable objects are more defined. That being said, the art style does work really well and is very visually appealing. It certainly gives you a sense of an interactive comic book. The soundtrack too, the game is wonderfully cheesy in its sound and music. It reminds me of all the B-movie superhero cartoons of the early 90s, which is kind of very appropriate for the setting of the game. The game's mechanics are ultimately solid. As video game adaptations go, this one has been very faithful to the source material and ensured that if you loved playing the tabletop version, you'll love this. However, there are many aspects that I was disappointed with. The biggest being the total lack of online multiplayer. Online multiplayer could have been the game's greatest feature, and it seems like a blaring oversight to bring this mobile game to Steam and not have multiplayer. Even more so considering it's a card game based off a tabletop game that is in its by nature designed for multiplayer. The game even promotes local multiplayer, which is ridiculous. Why would I want to have my friends sit around my PC and pass the mouse around when I could just play the tabletop original and have much more fun? The game's lack of single player content above the normal skirmish match mode is also disappointing. I felt that while the game's current content is acceptable for mobile devices, PC gamers inherently want more from their video games. This game was perfectly set up for having an enjoyable, even short campaign story mode of sorts, and again its exclusion just feels like a glaring oversight and a missed opportunity. Finally, I think that in my opinion the worst thing of all is that the developers are charging $15 on Steam when you can pick up the exact same game on an iOS or Android device for at least $5 cheaper. This seems to happen a great deal with mobile games when they come onto Steam, and I honestly can't see the justification in it. Yes, I am aware that Steam takes a cut, but from a consumer standpoint, you are charging me extra simply for the privilege of playing with a mouse rather than with a touchscreen. That in itself makes the exclusion of multiplayer or a single player story mode even more annoying. Even further, there is DLC on its way which will require additional purchasing. This includes mini packs that contain characters and environments, but also the developers are planning on releasing full-blown expansions. That being said, the game is however a solid, fun superhero themed card game. If you have played the tabletop or like interesting fun card games, then Sentinels of the Multiverse will be right up your street. While the game is good, I at the moment can personally see no reason why you wouldn't just buy it on a mobile device, as there is really no difference. However, should they decide to implement online multiplayer or something to that effect, then things could certainly get interesting and it might be worth the extra money. Thanks for watching everyone. Please do subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you enjoy my work overall, please head over to my Patreon and support me there, and follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you next time.